Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku led a team of heroes from every universe. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The air and ground beta tasted of concrete dust, recycled oxygen, and the faint, metallic tang of ozone left in the wake of Kaminari's last unfocused discharge. For Izuku Midoriya, it was the taste of progress. He crouched on the edge of a 5-story office building, the simulated city sprawling before him like a concrete and glass canyon. Below, the controlled chaos of Class 1's latest training exercise unfolded. The scenario was a classic. Secure and defuse. 2. Bombs, armed and placed in separate locations by the faculty, had to be retrieved and brought to a designated safe zone. All Might, observing from the control room with Aizawa, had called it a lesson in prioritization and triage under pressure. Simple on the surface, but a nightmare of logistics. Deku's role was central command and high mobility support. He was the queen on the chessboard, meant to react, reinforce, and clear paths. The responsibility hummed under his skin, a familiar, nervous energy that he was slowly learning to transmute into focus. Midoriya report. Ida's crisp voice crackled in his ear communicator. Team Todoroki is encountering heavy resistance near the west side target. It appears Yaoyorozu has been designated a villain and has fortified the position with tungsten plating. Copy that, Ida, Deku murmured, his eyes scanning the urban terrain. He could see the distant glint of Todoroki's ice wall, a stark white glacier blooming amidst the gray buildings. Bakugo's team is closing on the east target. How's your perimeter? Secure. Uraraka and I are preventing any villain reinforcements from flanking either team, Deku smiled. Ida's unwavering enthusiasm was a comforting constant. He shifted his weight, feeling the kinetic energy of the movement store within his muscles. Fa Gene. The fourth user's quirk felt like coiling a spring inside his own limbs. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, until he chose to unleash it. He was getting better at layering it, storing up small, incidental movements to build towards a single, explosive burst without having to tap into the raw, bone-breaking output of One for All. Step 1. Build the energy, he thought, rocking back and forth on the balls of his feet. Tendrils of black energy, thin as threads, ghosted from his fingertips, tasting the air. Black Whip, the fifth user's quirk, was his early warning system, an extension of his senses. Step 2. Maintain awareness. Hey, Deku! Stop mumbling to yourself and make yourself useful! Bakugo's signature roar blasted through the comms, distorted by feedback. This east side target is guarded by that tape dispenser Zero and the sparkly one. I'm about to blow the whole damn building down. Negative, Kaken! Deku snapped back, his voice firm. Collateral damage score is in effect. Find a non-destructive entry point. I'm on my way to support Todoroki. Once his side is clear, we'll converge on your position. A string of curses was his only reply before the line went dead. Classic Kaken. Deku took a deep breath. All right. Focus. He needed to cross 12 blocks, navigate 2 fortified positions, and assist in breaching a tungsten wall. A 15% St. Louis smash would get him airborne, but Fa Gene offered a more elegant solution. He had been practicing this all week. He coiled his legs, the stored energy thrumming. Ida, I'm moving. Watch for a creative entry. With a silent, explosive release of Fa Gene, he launched himself from the rooftop. He didn't fly so much as fall with purpose. As gravity took hold, he shot a strand of Black Whip towards a flagpole 3 blocks away. It connected with a satisfying thwip. He swung, the momentum carrying him in a breathtaking arc. Mid-swing, he released, shot another whip, and repeated the motion. It was a fluid, Tarzan-like dance through the concrete jungle, a seamless blend of 2 quirks that felt more natural with each passing day. The wind rushed past his ears, a symphony of his own making. For the first time, he felt less like a clumsy inheritor and more like a true hero, in command of his own power. This was his story. This was his path. He landed silently on the rooftop across from Todoroki's siege. Below, a massive wall of ice glittered, providing cover for his teammates. On the other side, Momo had clearly gone all out, creating small, automated turrets, firing rubber bullets from the windows of the target building. Todoroki, status? Deku spoke into his calm. The plating is too thick for my fire to melt quickly, and my ice can't get a purchase to tear it down. Todoroki's calm voice replied. We're pinned. Deku's eyes narrowed, his analytical mind kicking into overdrive. Tungsten is dense, high melting point. Brute force is inefficient. Yayorozu would have anticipated that. But what about resonance, Kirishima? Deku said, spotting the redhead hunkered behind an ice barrier. Is Bakugo still on comms? Nah, he muted everyone. Kirishima grunted, bullets pinging off his heart and arms. Why? I have an idea, but it's loud. Tell Todoroki to prep a concentrated fire blast, aim for the center of the wall. When I give the signal, Deku crept to the edge of the roof, directly above the fortified entrance. He took a deep breath, focusing the power of one for all into his right index and middle fingers. A faint green light glowed around them. He didn't need a full smash. He just needed a percussive shockwave. He channeled the memory of the second user's quirk, a faint, phantom sensation of overdrive. Gearshift. He couldn't control it yet, not consciously, but sometimes, in moments of extreme focus, he could feel its influence, a subtle quickening of his actions. He brought his fingers down, striking the concrete parapet with a sharp, precise flick. 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 The impacts were tiny, almost silent, but each sent a vibration through the building's superstructure. He was tapping it like a tuning fork, finding its resonant frequency. The building began to hum, a low thrumming that vibrated up through the soles of his boots. Now, Todoroki! Now! He yelled. On cue, a torrent of brilliant orange flame erupted from below, striking the center of the tungsten wall. The metal glowed cherry red, but it held. That wasn't the point. The heat, combined with the vibrations Deku was creating, was causing the molecular structure to destabilize. With a final, powerful flick infused with 8% of One for All, Deku sent a massive shockwave down the front of the building. The effect was instantaneous. The tungsten wall didn't break or melt. It shattered, dissolving into a million pieces with a deafening, crystalline chime. For a moment, there was stunned silence. Then, a cheer from Kirishima. Whoa! Manly! How'd you do that, Midoriya? Just applied physics. Deku breathed, a wide, triumphant grin splitting his face. It was in that moment of pure, unadulterated success that the world went wrong. It started subtly. A flicker of static across his vision, like a bad TV signal. The triumphant cheer in his ear communicator dissolved into a hiss of white noise for a split second. He blinked, shaking his head. Maybe a side effect of the resonance? Then came the sound. It wasn't a noise that traveled through the air. It was a noise that happened inside his head. It was the sound of a colossal pane of glass being struck, but played in reverse, a horrifying ninirk that seemed to pull at the very fabric of his hearing. He looked up, and his blood ran cold. The sky, a perfect, artificially maintained azure blue, was cracking. It wasn't a metaphor. Thin, black lines, like a spiderweb spun from pure anti-light, were spreading across the dome of the sky. They didn't radiate from a single point. They simply appeared, branching and connecting, a web of fractures in reality itself. With every passing second, the cracks widened, and through them, Deku saw not clouds, not the real sun, not even the metal framework of the training facility. He saw nothing. It was a void so profound, so absolute, it made the blackest night look like a blaze of glory. It was a starless, depthless, silent emptiness that seemed to actively drink the light. A cold that had nothing to do with temperature washed over ground beta. A conceptual chill that promised not just death, but cessation. Panic erupted through the comms. What the hell is that? Kirishima's voice was tight with fear. Aizawa-sensei! All might! The simulation dome is breaking! Ida shouted, his parade ground voice wavering for the first time. This is not part of the exercise! Aizawa's voice cut through, sharp and urgent. All students, evacuate ground beta immediately! Rendezvous at the entrance! Go! But it was too late. From the cracks in the sky, things began to fall. They weren't creatures. They were effigies. Humanoid figures, dozens of them, then hundreds, poured from the silent void like raindrops of despair. They were all colored in shades of gray, their forms looking like they were sculpted from cracked clay and sorrow. Their faces were blank, devoid of any feature save for hollow, empty eye sockets. They made no sound as they fell, landing on the streets and rooftops with a weightless, silent grace that was utterly terrifying. One landed on the street below Deku. It was tall, built like a titan of muscle, with wild, spiky hair that seemed to absorb the light. It wore the tattered remains of an orange GI. Its posture was that of a fighter, but its eyes were vacant pits of nothingness. It was a hollow champion, a story with its final page ripped out. Another landed near Todoroki's position. This one was clad in a parody of a patriotic uniform, its chest emblazoned with a star that was fractured and gray. It carried a circular shield, but where there should have been vibrant red, white, and blue, there was only a swirl of monochrome dust. It moved with a tactical precision that was chillingly robotic, a silent sentinel of a forgotten promise. They were echoes. Husks. And as they rose to their feet in unison, their hollow eyes fixed on the vibrant, colorful students of Class 1A. Villains? Uraraka's voice was a small, frightened whisper. They don't feel like villains. She was right. There was no malice, no anger, no greed. There was only a silent, overwhelming purpose. They moved with a singular, horrifying goal, to make everything as silent and gray as they were. Bakugo was the first to react, his answer to any problem. Get the hell out of my way! He screamed, launching himself towards the nearest group of echoes. He unleashed a full-power howitzer impact, a massive, swirling explosion that would have leveled half a city block. The explosion detonated in the center of the echoes. The light and heat were blinding. But when the smoke cleared, the echoes were still standing. Scuffed, perhaps. A few cracks in their gray skin, but they were utterly unharmed. The silent sentinel hadn't even bothered to raise its shield. Bakugo froze mid-air, his eyes wide with disbelief. What? The echoes moved. The one Bakugo had attacked, a lanky, gray form, looked at its own hands. A faint, colorless light began to flicker around its palms, mimicking the explosive energy of Bakugo's quirk. Deku's mind, his greatest asset, screamed at him. They're adapting. They don't have quirks, they're mirroring them. They're learning. Kaken, get back! Deku roared, but the echo was already lunging, its silent explosion meeting Bakugo's in a blast that sent him careening into the side of a building. The battle, if it could be called that, descended into a slaughter. Todoroki's flames were absorbed by an echo that began to glow with an inner, colorless heat. Kirishima's unbreakable form was met by an echo whose skin hardened into a material even tougher than his own, its silent punches driving him back. Mina's acid dissolved on their skin, leaving no mark. Kaminari discharged 1,000,000 volts, and the echoes simply stood there, convulsing for a moment before one of them pointed a finger, and a silent bolt of gray lightning shot back, incapacitating him. They were a nightmare made manifest. They were the antithesis of everything MHA's world stood for. A world of vibrant powers and loud personalities was being systematically dismantled by silent, adaptive nullity. Deku felt a primal fear he hadn't experienced since his first encounter with the Nomu at the USJ. He saw Uraraka, trying to make an echo weightless, get swatted aside. He saw Ida's recipro burst be matched by an echo that moved in a silent, gray blur. His friends, the most powerful generation of heroes in training, were being picked apart with cold, indifferent efficiency. Rage, pure and absolute, burned through the fear. Get away from them! He screamed, his voice raw. He pushed off the rooftop, one for all coursing through him at 30%. Green lightning, so vibrant and alive against the encroaching gray, crackled around his body. He was a comet of desperate hope. He smashed into the echo that had struck Uraraka, his fist connecting with a sound like stone grinding on stone. The echo flew back, crashing through a wall, but it didn't shatter. It was already beginning to pull itself back together. It's not enough. Black Whip erupted from his arms, dozens of tendrils lashing out. He wasn't just grabbing, he was striking, a storm of black energy that slammed into the echoes, sending them stumbling. He created a perimeter around his downed friends, his eyes darting everywhere at once, his mind a frantic storm of analysis. No vital signs. No heat signatures. They don't bleed. They don't feel pain. How do you fight something that isn't alive? They don't counter, they copy. Their weakness has to be something they can't copy, something unique. He saw the silent sentinel and the hollow champion advancing on him. They were ignoring the others. Their target was him. He felt it in his bones. That cold, hungry void wanted him. One for all pulsed within him, a beacon of warmth and light in the spreading cold. The vestiges were stirring, not with advice, but with a collective, primal terror. This enemy was wrong on a fundamental level. I won't let you! Deku snarled, planting his feet. He combined his quirks. He used FA gene to build kinetic energy, then released it in a single bound, using float to hang in the air for a precious second. Black Whip shot out, wrapping around the hollow champion's arms and legs, pinning it. Manchester! Smash! He brought his leg down in a devastating axe kick, a full 45% of one for all behind it. The impact was colossal. The concrete beneath the echoes shattered, a crater forming around it. The hollow champion's form cracked, fissures spreading across its gray body. For a glorious second, Deku thought he'd done it. Then, the cracks began to seal. The echo's dead eyes stared up at him, and from its own back, silent, gray tendrils, a horrific mockery of Black Whip, began to emerge. It had copied him. Despair, cold and sharp, pierced his heart. While he was distracted, the silent sentinel had moved. It wasn't behind him. It was beside him, its shield raised not for defense, but to slam him sideways, cutting off his path to his friends. Deku hit a wall with bone-jarring force, the air forced from his lungs. He staggered to his feet, pain flaring in his ribs. He was cornered. The hollow champion, now free, stood before him. The silent sentinel was to his right. A dozen more were closing in, a wall of silent, gray death. He was a hero. Heroes didn't give up. He crouched, ready to push one for all to its absolute limit, even if it destroyed his body. He would buy his friends time to escape. That was his role. That was his promise. The silent sentinel took a step forward. It didn't rush. It didn't need to. It slowly raised its hand, its gray, cracked fingers reaching for his face. As its hand drew near, Deku felt the most terrifying sensation of his life. It wasn't pain. It was unwriting. The vibrant green of his costume began to fade around the edges, turning to a dull gray. The feeling of one for all, the warm sun of 8 generations of hope within him, began to dim, as if a black hole was siphoning its light. The voices of the vestiges grew distant, screaming in a place he could no longer hear. His story was being erased. His body was locked in place, paralyzed by this conceptual assault. This was how it ended. Not in a blaze of glory, but in a silent, gray fade to nothing. He closed his eyes, a single tear tracing a path through the grime on his cheek. I'm sorry, All Might. Thwipzing. A sound, sharp and clear, cut through the oppressive silence. A flash of brilliant gold, a lasso, glowing with an inner light so pure it was painful to look at, wrapped around the silent sentinel's outstretched arm. The echo's hand stopped, inches from Deku's face. The golden light of the rope seemed to burn it, causing its gray skin to smoke and hiss. With a powerful tug from an unseen source, the silent sentinel was yanked off its feet and flung violently into the approaching hollow champion. They collided with a silent crunch and tumbled into a heap of gray limbs. Deku's eyes snapped open. Standing on a pile of rubble 20 feet away was a woman who seemed carved from myth. She was impossibly tall and regal, clad in red, blue, and gold armor that shone like a beacon. A sword was at her hip and a shield was strapped to her back, but it was the glowing lasso, now coiling back into her hand, that held his attention. Her face was one of timeless beauty and fierce determination, her dark eyes holding the wisdom of ages and the fire of a warrior born. She landed on the street with a thunderous boom that shook the very ground, the sound itself a defiance of the encroaching silence. Before Deku could even process this divine intervention, he felt a strange, sticky sensation on his back. Thwip! He was yanked backwards, flying through the air with a startled yelp. He landed, stumbling but safe, on a rooftop 100 feet away from the fight. Whoa there, green machine! Looked like you were about to become a modern art installation called Sad Boy in Grey. Deku spun around. Perched on the ledge, Upside down, and holding himself up with one hand, was a figure in a striking red and blue suit, patterned with a fine black web. The white, expressive lenses of his mask widened slightly. New dimension, same old cosmic horror trying to unexist everything. You'd think they'd get a new hobby. The figure quipped, flipping upright with an effortless acrobatic flair. Name's Spider-Man, and you really need to work on your situational awareness. Deku's jaw was on the floor. His mind, the fanboy part that he could never fully suppress, was short-circuiting. Wonder Woman? Spider-Man? They were from comic books. Fictional characters. It was impossible. His brain freeze was shattered by a sound that was somehow both 1,000 birds chirping and a swirling vortex. Odama Rasengan! A new figure blurred past Deku's rooftop, a flash of bright orange and sun-yellow hair. He held a swirling sphere of brilliant blue energy in his hand, a miniature hurricane of raw power. He slammed it into a dense crowd of echoes that had been swarming Todoroki and Kirishima. The resulting explosion was not like Bakugo's. It was pure, concussive force. There was no fire, just a shockwave of spiraling energy that expanded outwards, blasting 24 echoes into dust. Not gray chunks. Pure, absolute dust that faded into nothing. The figure landed in a low crouch, grinning a wide, feral grin. He wore a black and orange jacket, and had 3 whisker-like marks on each cheek. His blue eyes, crackling with energy, were more alive than anything Deku had ever seen. All right. Who's next, believe it? He shouted, his voice echoing with boundless confidence. The remaining echoes, hundreds of them, began to converge on these 4 new, vibrant anomalies. The silent, tactical movements were gone, replaced by a single-minded rush. They flowed through the streets like a river of gray sludge. Deku, Spider-Man, the warrior princess, and the orange ninja were about to be overwhelmed by sheer numbers. The civilians, well, the students designated as civilians for the exercise, were cowering behind a bus stop, directly in the path of a flanking group of echoes. Then, the ground moved. It didn't shake. It rose. A massive wall of solid earth, 20 feet high and 50 feet wide, erupted from the asphalt with a deep, sonorous thrum. It formed a perfect, curved barrier, shielding the terrified students from the approaching wave of gray. The wall was smooth, shaped with an artist's care, not a single crack in its surface. Atop the wall, a new figure landed as light as a leaf. He was a man, clad in the orange and yellow robes of a monk, a long staff held in his hand. He was bald, save for a large, blue arrow that pointed down his forehead. His eyes, a serene, knowing gray, seemed to hold a deep, ancient peace. He didn't look at the echoes with anger or fear, but with a profound sadness. The 4 impossible newcomers instinctively began to move towards each other, drawn by the sheer force of their heroic natures. Wonder Woman's powerful strides ate up the ground. Naruto flickered, appearing in a blur of speed. Spider-Man swung on a web, landing with a light flip, and from his wall, the airbending monk simply stepped down, a gentle gust of wind carrying him to the street. They met in the center of the devastation. And in the center of them all was Deku. He stood there, shaking, his mind a maelstrom of confusion, fear, and a terrifying, burgeoning hope. These people, they weren't real. They couldn't be. But they were here. They were fighting, and they were turning the tide. The 5 of them fell into a natural formation, a circle of vibrant color in a world fading to gray. Back to back, they stood against the tide. Deku could feel the divine power radiating from the Amazon on his left, the boundless life energy from the ninja on his right. He heard the quiet hum of strange technology from the spider-themed man, and felt a calming aura of peace from the monk. And they, in turn, could feel him. They could feel the star-hot core of One for All, a power built on legacy, sacrifice, and the stubborn, indomitable will to save others. It was the reason they were all here. He was the anchor. The echoes paused, their silent, collective intelligence reassessing this new, impossible equation. The silent sentinel and the hollow champion reformed, their dead eyes fixed on the 5 heroes. The air grew thick with unspoken threat. Hundreds of gray, silent monsters, and 5 impossible legends. The silence was finally broken by the man in red and blue. Spider-Man's masked head turned, his white lenses focusing directly on the trembling, green-clad teenager at the center of it all. The quip was gone from his voice, replaced by the weary tone of a veteran strategist sizing up a new battlefield. "All right, kid," he said, his voice a grounding wire in the insanity. "Any bright ideas? You look like you're the local." The world was a cacophony of impossibilities. To his Ukamidori's left, a warrior princess deflected a silent, gray energy blast with golden bracelets that flared with divine light. To his right, a blonde shinobi with whiskers multiplied into a dozen identical copies, each one a whirlwind of orange and righteous fury. Above him, a man in red and blue swung on a silver thread, his movements a physics-defying ballet of momentum and wit. Behind him, a serene monk stood as the eye of the storm, his calm presence a stark contrast to the tide of gray monstrosities flooding the streets of Ground Beta. And at the center of it all stood Deku, his mind screaming, his body thrumming with the terrified energy of one for all. He was the anchor, the nexus, the local. And Spider-Man had just asked him for a plan. A plan? His brain felt like a circuit board doused in water. Plan against what? Reality is broken, comic book characters are real, and an army of silent, power-copying mannequins are trying to turn my friends into shades of gray. What part of my curriculum covered this? The echoes, their advance momentarily stalled by the arrival of the four legends, began to move again. Their initial rush had been broken, and now their cold, adaptive intelligence was reasserting itself. They spread out, forming a semicircle, their hollow eyes fixed not on the newcomers, but on Deku himself. The message was clear. He was the prize. "They're focusing on the kid," Spider-Man called out, landing nimbly on a lamppost. His head tilted, the white lenses of his mask narrowing. "That green lightning you've got? I think they're hungry for it. His energy is a beacon," Wonder Woman stated, her voice a low, melodic command. She never took her eyes off the enemy. "It sings a song of life that this silence despises." Naruto Uzumaki dispelled his clones, reforming in a flash of orange beside Deku. He clapped a hand on Deku's shoulder, a gesture so firm and confident it nearly sent the boy to his knees. "So you're the main course, huh? Don't worry, kid. I'm the best bodyguard in any world, believe it." Deku couldn't form words. He just stared at the whisker-marked face, at the bright blue eyes so full of unwavering determination. He was standing next to Naruto Uzumaki. His 10-year-old self would have simply evaporated on the spot. Aang, carried by a gentle breeze, floated down to join them. "Their essence is empty," he said, his voice soft but resonant. "Like a cup waiting to be filled. They don't want to defeat you. They want to become you by consuming what you are." This terrifyingly accurate analysis snapped Deku out of his stupor. They were right. The way the Echo had tried to copy Black Whip, the way it had reached for his face, the feeling of being unwritten. "We can't let them touch us," Deku stammered out, his voice thin but clear. "They adapt to our abilities. Brute force doesn't work for long. They learn. A learning enemy. Great. My favorite kind." Spider-Man sighed, a theatrical slump in his shoulders. "So what's the play, team leader?" "I'm not a..." Deku started to protest, but the advance of the echoes cut him off. The silent sentinel, the gray parody of a super soldier, had reformed. It pointed its shield at them, and the fractured star on its surface began to glow with a sickly, void-like energy. There was no time for plans. There was only time for survival. "Scatter!" Deku yelled, a surge of adrenaline finally overriding his shock. But they didn't scatter. Just as the Sentinel's shield was about to unleash its silent, nullifying blast, a light bloomed in the center of their circle. It wasn't a flash. It was a sunrise. A pure, white, all-encompassing brilliance that didn't burn, but simply was. It had no source, and yet it came from everywhere at once. The oppressive silence of the echoes was replaced by a sound, a single, perfect, resonant chime that vibrated in the very marrow of their bones. Deku felt a sensation of being gently unraveled, his physical form dissolving into threads of light and information. The feeling of concrete under his boots, the smell of ozone, the sight of the crumbling sky, it all dissolved into the pristine white. He felt a moment of vertigo, a disorienting lurch as if the universe had been pulled out from under him. He closed his eyes against the impossible brightness, and then, Just as suddenly as it began, it was over. He opened his eyes. The sensation of solid ground returned, but it was different. It felt like standing on pure crystal, cool and unyielding. The air was still, carrying not a scent, but a feeling of immense, ancient knowledge. They were in a place that defied geometry. They stood on a central crystalline platform in a space of impossible scale. Stretching in every direction, as far as the eye could see, were shelves. They weren't made of wood or metal, but of solid, shimmering light, forming endless corridors and soaring archways that seemed to fold in on themselves. There was no ceiling, only a swirling, living cosmos of soft, multicolored nebulae and slow-drifting stars. And the books. The shelves were filled with them, but they were not made of paper. Some were perfectly cut crystals, trapping a single, significant moment in time within their facets. A man in blue and red pushing a planet, a young boy pulling a sword from a stone, a woman in a pilot's jacket shattering a warship with a blast of cosmic energy. Others were swirling spheres of gas and light, miniature galaxies whispering stories in languages that were felt rather than heard. Still others were simply empty spaces on the shelf that hummed with the potential of a story yet to be told. The air itself was alive, shimmering with motes of light like dust in a sunbeam, each one a fragment of a forgotten tale. The silence here was not the empty, hungry silence of the null. It was a reverent hush, the collective quiet of a billion stories waiting to be read. What is this place? Diana's voice was filled with a rare, genuine awe. She, who had walked the halls of Olympus, looked around with the wonder of a mortal in a god's domain. Looks like the New York Public Library had a baby with a supernova. Peter Parker murmured, his masked lenses wide. He reached out a hand, his fingers hovering just inches from a book that looked like a captured bolt of lightning. I'm detecting, wow! Tachyons, chronotons, exotic particles I don't even have names for. This place isn't just in space. It's outside of it. Naruto was less analytical. Whoa! He breathed, spinning in a slow circle. This is way bigger than the Hokage Library. And way sparklier. Aang simply closed his eyes, a serene smile on his face. So many spirits, he whispered. So many lives. It's beautiful. Deku, however, felt a familiar pang of anxiety. This place was beautiful, yes, but it was also wrong. They had been plucked from a battlefield, from a world that was being erased. His friends, his classmates, all might, they were still back there. We have to go back, he said, his voice urgent. My friends are in danger. Your world is frozen, Izuku Midoriya, a voice said. It echoed not through the air, but directly in their minds. It was faint, weary, and frayed at the edges, like a transmission from across an impossible distance. A single moment, held in stasis. But the pause cannot last forever. From the heart of the library, where countless corridors of light converged, a figure began to coalesce. It was formed not of flesh and bone, but of shimmering, golden script and fading light. Ancient, forgotten characters and flowing lines of text swirled and knitted together to create a tall, vaguely humanoid shape. It wore what looked like a long, hooded robe made of fading constellations. Its form was unstable. Edges flickered and dissolved into motes of light before reforming, like a candle flame guttering in a breeze. It had no face, only a smooth expanse where a soft, internal light pulsed in time with its words. Who are you? Diana demanded, her hand resting on the hilt of her sword. Her posture was defensive, a goddess ready to face a cosmic entity. I am the librarian, the being of light replied, its form wavering. And this is the archive. The repository of all stories. The nexus of every narrative that has ever been, or ever will be. It raised a hand woven from starlight and scripture, gesturing towards a large, floating crystal nearby. The crystal clouded over, then cleared, showing them an image, a world that looked like a 1930s noir film, all sharp shadows and Art Deco skyscrapers. A figure in a leather helmet and goggles, the aeronaut, was fighting on the wing of a biplane against gray, silent echoes. I have watched for eons as stories are born, as they flourish, as they end. The librarian's voice filled their minds, laced with a deep, cosmic sorrow. But a new reader has come to my library, one that does not read, but erases. It is a sentient paradox, born from the conceptual void between universes. A nihilistic consciousness that has named itself the null. The image in the crystal shifted. It showed a vast, swirling blackness, the same starless void they had seen through the cracks in their sky. The null believes that struggle is meaningless. That sacrifice is pointless noise. That heroism is the universe's most persistent, irritating delusion. The librarian explained, its light form flickering more violently now. It does not seek to conquer. It seeks silence. It travels from one reality to the next, consuming the narrative energy that gives a story its meaning, its weight. It feeds on the very concept of heroism. Peter stepped forward, his posture tensing. The echoes, he said, the name clicking into place. Those things were its army. They are what remains of the heroes from universes the null has already silenced. The librarian confirmed. The crystal showed them the hollow champion, the silent sentinel, and dozens more, their vibrant colors and dynamic lives reduced to featureless, gray husks. They are puppets, animated by the null's will, used to accelerate the erasure of the next world in its path. The weight of the explanation settled on them all. This wasn't just a monster to be punched. It was a philosophical plague, an entity that wanted to unwrite existence itself. Why us? Deku asked, his voice barely a whisper. Why did you bring us here? My own story is ending, the librarian said, its form dimming perceptibly. I have used the last of my power for one final gambit. I reached across the storyverse, searching for the greatest champions, the brightest lights, to stand against the coming dark. It gestured to each of them in turn. Diana, Princess of Themyscira, daughter of Zeus. A story of compassion and strength that has saved your world 1,000 times over. Naruto Uzumaki, the child of prophecy, the 7th Hokage. A story of perseverance that turned a village's hatred into its greatest love. Aang, the last airbender, the Avatar. A story of balance and peace that ended a 100-year war. Peter Parker, the spectacular Spider-Man. A story of great power and greater responsibility. A quiet, neighborhood heroism that has inspired millions. The librarian paused, its non-face turning to the bewildered boy in the green suit. And you? Izuku Midoriya. Deku. A profound silence filled the archive as the four legends turned to look at the teenager who was visibly trembling. The null was drawn to your world by a unique concentration of narrative energy. The librarian continued, its voice focused entirely on Deku. A power that is, by its very nature, anathema to everything the null represents. A quirk that is not one power, but a story in itself, passed from one generation to the next, growing stronger with each telling. Deku's eyes went wide. He could feel it, humming under his skin. One for all, yes, the librarian confirmed. A power built on the legacy and hope of those who came before. A chain of heroic will. It is a living, breathing narrative of succession and sacrifice. It is the antithesis of the null's silence. It is the perfect anchor. And using its light as a beacon, I pulled these other great stories to you. A heavy moment passed. Then, Naruto broke it, crossing his arms and fixing the librarian with a skeptical glare. Okay, I get it. Big bad void monster wants to eat stories, and this kid's power is like super spicy food it can't handle. Fine, he said, gesturing with his thumb towards Deku. But if you brought us all here to fight it, who's in charge? You need a leader for a mission this crazy. Diana nodded in agreement, her expression stern and serious. A team of this nature, with such disparate origins and methods, requires a clear chain of command to be effective. Peter rubbed the back of his neck. She's got a point, Glowstick. You can't just throw the Justice League, the Avengers, and whatever you guys are, into a blender and hope it works. You need a strategist. The librarian's light pulsed, and its voice, though weak, was firm and absolute. The leader has already been chosen. All eyes turned to the cosmic being, waiting. It is Izuku Midoriya. The silence that followed was so profound it almost rivaled the null's. It was a silence born of pure, unadulterated shock. Deku's world tilted on its axis for the second time that day. He felt his blood drain from his face, a high-pitched ringing in his ears. He pointed a shaking finger at his own chest, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. Me? Naruto was the first to find his voice, and it was a voice of incredulous outrage. Him? He shouted, pointing dramatically at Deku. No offense, kid, you seem enthusiastic. But I'm the Hokage. I lead an entire army of shinobi. He's just a kid. The shinobi is correct, Diana stated, her tone not angry, but logically severe. I am a general of the Amazon army. I have led warriors in battles that have shaped the course of human history for millennia. This boy is a student. Wisdom is forged in time, not bestowed in a moment. Peter held up his hands, playing peacemaker, though his own bewilderment was clear. Whoa, let's all take a breath. Look, librarian dude, I get the whole unlikely hero trope. I've starred in a few of those myself. But these two have a point. Leading a team of, well, us, that's a pretty big ask for someone who still looks like he has a curfew. Only Aang remained silent, his gaze fixed on Deku. He wasn't looking at the trembling, overwhelmed boy. He was looking deeper, at the incandescent core of One for All, at the storm of potential swirling within him. He saw not a student, but a successor, a vessel for an immense legacy. Deku, meanwhile, was frantically waving his hands, his face a mask of pure panic. No, they're right. You've made a terrible mistake. I can't lead them. They're Diana Prince. And Naruto Uzumaki, you're Spider-Man. You're all legends. I just got my hero license last year. I'm not even the top of my class. Kaken is, wait, that's not the point. The point is, I can't. The librarian's light flared, silencing the protests. Its form seemed to solidify for a moment, its voice gaining a new, urgent strength. That is precisely why it must be him. It turned its featureless face towards the three skeptical heroes. You are correct. You are legends. Your stories are cornerstones of the archive, epic poems of heroism that have reached their crescendo. Your paths are forged, your strengths known. The Null understands legends. It knows how to deconstruct them, how to find the single thread of failure or regret, and pull until the entire tapestry unravels. The librarian's focus returned to Deku, who had frozen at the entity's words. But you, Izuku Midoriya, you are a story still being written. Your final chapter is a blank page. Your potential is a chaotic, unpredictable force that the Null cannot calculate. It cannot deconstruct a hero who is still discovering who he is. Your potential, your boundless capacity for growth, is the one weapon the Null truly fears. The librarian's ethereal form drifted closer to Deku. You will not lead them through authority, Hokage. You do not have it. You will not lead them through ancient wisdom, Princess. You have not yet earned it. You will lead them with the one thing you have in greater abundance than anyone I have ever encountered. It paused, letting the weight of its next words settle. You will lead them through analysis and empathy. Your strength is not in commanding, but in understanding. You see the heart of a person, the core of their power, and you find a way to make it shine brighter. That is your gift. That is how you will turn this team of disparate legends into a single, cohesive hope. You will be their heart and their mind, not their fist. The words sank into the grand, silent space. Naruto's jaw, which had been set in a stubborn line, softened slightly. The argument resonated with him, the idea of potential, of a person's true strength coming from their heart. It was the bedrock of his own philosophy. Diana's stern expression remained, but a flicker of understanding entered her ancient eyes. She had seen commanders who led with force and those who led with inspiration. This was a new paradigm, but the logic, from a cosmic perspective, was sound. She would observe. Peter Parker let out a long, low whistle. He looked at Deku, really looked at him, at the frantic energy, the notebook he probably had tucked away somewhere, the earnest, terrified eyes. And in that moment Peter saw a ghost of himself. A scared kid from Queens, bitten by a spider, handed a power he never asked for and a responsibility he could barely comprehend. Lead by empathy, a team of walking gods and ninjas, Peter said, a small, wry smile in his voice. He walked over to Deku and clapped a hand on his shoulder, a mirror of Naruto's earlier gesture, but this one was gentler, more supportive. No pressure, kid. Deku looked up at him, his eyes wide with a million questions. The librarian's form began to fade rapidly now, its light dimming, the script of its body unraveling into dust. My time is over. The archive has given you a sanctuary, and a mission. The Null's primary assault is on your world, Izuku Midoriya. It is your home. You must stop it there. The archive will transport you where you need to go, but the strategy, the victory, that is up to you now. With a final, gentle pulse of light, like a dying star, the librarian dissolved completely, leaving only a faint shimmer in the air and the low hum of a billion stories. The five of them were alone. The weight of it all, the mission, the title of leader, the fate of his world, crashed down on Deku with the force of a physical blow. His legs gave out, and he sank to the crystalline floor, his head in his hands. His breath came in ragged, panicked gasps. It was too much. He was just Deku. A fanboy who had lucked into the world's greatest power. He wasn't a leader. He wasn't a legend. He was an imposter, and he was going to get everyone killed. The familiar, crushing weight of his own inadequacy threatened to swallow him whole. He felt a small hand on his shoulder. He looked up to see Aang kneeling beside him, his gray eyes full of a compassion that seemed as deep as the cosmos around them. "Breathe, Izuku," the Avatar said softly. "Just breathe. The librarian didn't choose a legend. It chose a person. It's all right to be scared. I was terrified when they told me I had to face the Fire Lord." Deku stared at him, his panic slowly receding in the face of Aang's profound calm. From the other side, Naruto grunted, plopping down cross-legged on the floor. "Hokage, General, whatever." The glowy guy had a point. Being the strongest doesn't always make you the best leader. Sometimes, it's the guy who worries the most about his friends. He offered a wide, toothy grin. "But don't screw it up, you hear me? Or I'm taking over." Diana remained standing, a statuesque pillar of grace and power. "Your fear is not a weakness, boy," she said, her voice softer than before. "It proves you understand the stakes. That is a trait worthy of respect. Now get up. We do not have the luxury of despair." Deku took a shuddering breath, then another. He looked at the faces around him, Aang's peaceful acceptance, Naruto's challenging grin, Diana's stern encouragement, and Peter's knowing, empathetic gaze from behind his mask. They were waiting for him. He wasn't All Might. He couldn't be. He couldn't just smile and make everything okay with his presence alone. The librarian was right. He had to do this his way. The only way he knew how. Slowly, shakily, he pushed himself to his feet. His hands were still trembling, but he fumbled with the pouch on his utility belt. With a familiar zip, he pulled out a fresh, unopened notebook and a pen. The crisp, clean scent of the paper was a small, mundane anchor in a sea of cosmic insanity. He stared at the blank cover for a long moment, his heart hammering in his chest. Then, with a newfound resolve that solidified in his gut, he uncapped the pen. His handwriting was still a little shaky, but the letters were clear and determined. On the cover he wrote, "Multiversal Hero Analysis for the Future, Volume 1. He flipped open to the first page. The pressure was immense. The fate of his world, maybe all worlds, rested on his shoulders. He was overwhelmed, terrified, and completely out of his depth. But he had a notebook. He had a pen. And he had a job to do. His eyes scanned the heroes assembled before him. His gaze landed on the man in red and blue, the first one who had spoken to him, the one whose presence felt both legendary and incredibly, relatably human. He put pen to paper. The frantic scribbling began, a sound of pure, concentrated thought in the hallowed halls of the archive. Hero name, Spider-Man. Real name, Peter Parker, self-identified. Universe designation, unknown, seems technologically advanced, but not impossibly so. Powers observed, wall-crawling/adhesion. Superhuman strength, level indeterminate, but significant. Enhanced agility reflexes, dodged multiple attacks with ease. Web shooters artificial? Organic? Tech seems self-made. Extremely versatile, used for traversal, restraint, and impromptu conversation starters. Personality, highly talkative. Uses humor as a defense mechanism/tactical distraction. Experienced. Seems to understand the cosmic stakes better than most. Appears sympathetic. He paused, tapping the pen against the page. Then he added one more, crucial detail. Witty banter, potential weakness? Or hidden strength? Must observe further. The transition was jarring, a sensory whiplash. One moment, They were standing in the pristine, silent grandeur of the archive, a place outside of time and scent. The next, they were assaulted by a world of grime, noise, and desperation. A portal of shimmering light deposited them onto a narrow, rivet-studded catwalk high above a city cloaked in a perpetual, sickly yellow twilight. The air was thick and tasted of hot oil, coal smoke, and the acrid tang of burned metal. Below, Art Deco spires of soot-stained brass and iron clawed at a sky clogged with smog, their grand designs obscured by a film of industrial filth. This was not a world of clean lines and bright colors. It was a world powered by roaring pistons and groaning gears, a diesel-punk nightmare fighting for its life. The noise was a physical thing. The percussive chug-chug-chug of colossal engines, the shriek of tortured metal, the rhythmic thump-thump-thump of anti-air cannons, and a high-pitched, ethereal humming that seemed to be the sound of the world's own pain. "Okay, I take it back," Peter Parker coughed, the lenses of his mask already fogging slightly. "The library was nice. This place smells like my Aunt May's oven after I tried to bake a lasagna in a plastic container." They were standing on the outer hull of a colossal airship, a sky galleon, that defied gravity with brute, roaring force. It was a masterpiece of function over form, an airborne fortress named the Audacity, its name emblazoned in fading gold paint on the armored prow. It was under siege. Swarms of smaller, insect-like fighters, all rendered in the same soulless gray of the echoes from ground beta, darted and weaved around the airship. Their forms were corrupted parodies of this world's technology, silent, glide-winged craft that spat bolts of nullifying gray energy. They slammed into the hull of the Audacity, not exploding, but erasing chunks of the metal, leaving behind patches of flat, textureless void. A voice, thick with static and exhaustion, crackled into existence in their minds, a telepathic broadcast from the archive's lingering magic. "This is Captain Evan Roslin of the Ethelgardian Sky Galleon Audacity. We are all that's left. Our engines are failing, our shields are gone. We are making our final stand at the Viridian Spire. May our story echo in defiance." Deku's eyes widened. He could see it in the distance. The Viridian Spire, the tallest building in the city, its peak lost in the smog. And he could see the state of the Audacity. One of its massive, multi-story piston engines was sputtering, trailing black smoke and silent, gray corruption. The ship was listing heavily to port. They didn't have much time. The weight of leadership settled on him like a physical shroud. His heart hammered against his ribs. Led them through analysis and empathy. It sounded so profound in the quiet of the archive. Here, in the roaring chaos, it felt like a cruel joke. He had to be all might. He had to be decisive. He took a shaky breath, forcing the panic down. "Okay, team," he said, his voice coming out higher than he'd intended. "Here's the plan." The four legends turned to him, their expressions a mixture of expectation, skepticism, and readiness. "Their goal is to disable the ship," Deku began, pointing a trembling finger. "That sputtering engine is their main target. We need to protect it. At the same time, we need to clear the hull of those smaller fighter echoes. Naruto, you're the fastest, and you can be everywhere at once. I need you to run interference. Take out as many of those fighters as you can." Naruto grinned, cracking his knuckles. "A one-man army? You got it. Leave it to me, Wonder Woman," Deku continued, turning to the Amazon. "You're our defensive corps. Your strength is immense. I need you on the deck by that engine. Nothing gets past you. Form a defensive line." Diana gave a single, sharp nod, her eyes already scanning for the most strategic position. "It will be done, Aang. We need crowd control. Use your airbending to disrupt their flight patterns. Push them into Naruto's path. Create chaos for them, not for us." Aang bowed his head slightly. "I will try to separate them without causing unnecessary destruction. Spider-Man, you're agile. I need you clearing the echoes that are already on the hull. Web them up, throw them off, do what you do. Keep them from boring through the armor." Peter gave him a two-fingered salute. "Web em and yeet em." "Copy that, Green Lantern, it's Deku." He corrected automatically, his mind racing. It was a simple plan. A direct plan. All Might would have approved. Protect the objective, eliminate the threats. He would stay mobile, use Black Whip and float to move between them, reinforcing where needed. It was sound. It had to be. "Let's go!" he yelled, trying to infuse his voice with a confidence he absolutely did not feel. What followed was not the symphony of heroism he had envisioned. It was a cacophony of failure. Naruto, with a gleeful shout of "Shadow Clone Jutsu!" exploded into 100 identical copies. The deck of the Audacity was suddenly flooded with a chaotic army of orange blurs. They leaped into the sky, running on air, jumping from one Echo fighter to the next. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. Dozens of the silent gray craft were smashed to pieces by a barrage of Razengans and energetic punches. It was also utter chaos. Diana had taken her position near the wounded engine, her shield raised, her stance an immovable rock. She was prepared for a frontal assault, a disciplined charge she could meet and break. What she got was a maelstrom. Naruto's clones, in their unrestrained zeal, were everywhere. They were fighting Echoes right in front of her, behind her, above her. An Echo fighter, knocked off course by a clone, came spinning towards her. She batted it away with her shield, but the motion forced her to break her stance. Another clone, chasing a different Echo, zipped past her head, forcing her to duck. "Hold a formation!" she commanded, her voice cutting through the din. "We're making our own formation! It's called the Get 'Em All formation!" A dozen Narutos shouted back in unison, not a hint of insubordination in their voices, just pure, unadulterated battle joy. This was not an army. This was a force of nature, and it was impossible to command. Frustration etched itself onto Diana's perfect features. She was a general without soldiers, a shield maiden in the middle of a riot. Meanwhile, high above the deck, Peter's problem became immediately apparent. He web-zipped onto a passing Echo fighter, crawled over its silent gray fuselage, and with a grunt of effort, ripped a panel of its wing off. He kicked off, firing a web line to the next fighter. This was his domain, high-speed aerial combat. But it was limited. "Hey, Deku boss!" he called out, his voice tinny over the comms Deku's mind was still projecting. "Loving the scenery, but my usual MO involves big, tall, stationary things to swing from. I'm basically just jumping from one bad guy to the next up here. Can't build any of my fancy web traps." He was a spider without a web. The open sky, the very thing that defined this world, was his greatest handicap. He was reduced to a close-quarters brawler, agile and strong, but unable to use the full, creative scope of his abilities to control the battlefield. Aang's struggle was more philosophical, and far more painful. He moved like a leaf on the wind, a blur of orange and yellow robes against the smoggy sky. He wasn't attacking. He was redirecting. He created powerful gusts of wind that sent Echo fighters spinning harmlessly away from the ship. He encased the hulking, brute-like Echo on the deck in a tomb of solid rock pulled from the ship's own ballast. He was the picture of control, the master of the elements enforcing his will. But the Echoes were not men from the Fire Nation. They could not be reasoned with, intimidated or imprisoned. The one encased in rock simply dissolved its form, passing through the stone like a ghost, and reformed on the other side, its hollow eyes still fixed on its target. The fighters he blew away simply corrected their course and came back, their silent purpose unwavering. Aang's pacifism, his greatest moral strength, was a tactical dead end. He could delay them, but he couldn't stop them. He was trying to catch water in a sieve, and the frustration was evident in the growing intensity of his movements. For the first time, perhaps in decades, the Avatar was faced with a problem that could not be solved by seeking balance. Deku watched it all unfold with a growing sense of dread. From his vantage point, flitting between engagements with Blackwhip, he could see the cracks in his plan. It wasn't a plan, it was a set of disconnected instructions. He was treating them like individual pieces on a board, not a cohesive unit. My analysis was wrong, his mind screamed. I focused on what they could do, not how they would do it together. He saw 3 Echoes break through Naruto's chaotic offensive, landing on the deck and charging Diana. She met them with flawless grace and power, her sword a blur of silver light, her shield an immovable wall. She dispatched them easily, but as she did, another group landed on the far side of the engine she was supposed to be protecting. "Diana! The port engine manifold!" Deku yelled, his voice strained. "I am occupied!" She bit back, parrying a blow that would have shattered a mountain. "Naruto!" A little more control. Your clones are getting in her way. Control? I'm taking out dozens of them. This is working. A nearby clone responded cheerfully before dissolving under a silent energy blast. It was falling apart. Deku tried to compensate, swinging over to the port engine. He unleashed a 20% Delaware smash, a blast of focused air pressure that sent the new group of echoes scattering. But as he dealt with that, he saw a massive echo, a corrupted, gray version of an Ethelgardian bomber, positioning itself for a run on the ship's bridge. Captain Rosalind's voice crackled in his head again. They're targeting the bridge. I can't evade. Spider-Man, can you stop that bomber? Deku asked, his voice cracking with desperation. Sure thing, boss. Peter's voice came back, strained. Just as soon as I grow wings. It's too far, I can't reach it in time. Deku was frozen. 3 threats, 3 fires to put out, and he was the only one who could see them all. He was the leader. He had to make a choice. What would All Might do? All Might would find a way to do all 3. He would be a symbol. But Deku wasn't All Might. He hesitated for a single, fatal second. In that second, Diana, forced to overextend to protect the engine, took a glancing blow from an echo's nullifying touch. It struck her shield, and a patch of the celestial bronze turned a dull, lifeless gray. She grunted in shock, the feedback stinging her arm. In that second, Aang, seeing the bomber, formed a colossal hand of solid air, a desperate attempt to catch the craft. But the bomber just plowed through it, its nullifying field dissipating the Avatar's power. In that second, Deku made his choice. Save the captain. He fired a dozen strands of black whip at the bomber, wrapping them around its wings and fuselage. He planted his feet on the deck, the metal groaning under the strain. I've got it! He roared. He was strong. One for All gave him the power of a god. But the bomber was a monster of corrupted physics, and it was bigger and stronger. He was holding it, but he was being dragged across the deck, his boots carving deep gouges in the metal, and he had taken his eye off the most important target. With a deafening shriek of tearing metal, the echoes that had been chipping away at the main engine finally broke through. They swarmed the massive piston, their gray hands touching the glowing, superheated machinery. The engine's powerful chug-chug-chug faltered, sputtered, and died with a final, mournful groan. The corruption spread instantly. The entire engine assembly turned a mottled dead gray. The power loss was catastrophic. The Audacity, its port side lift gone, lurched violently. The deck tilted to a 45-degree angle. Everything that wasn't bolted down, and everyone, went sliding. Deku lost his footing, his concentration breaking. His black whip hold on the bomber vanished. Naruto's clones, caught off guard, tumbled into each other and across the deck, many dispelling in puffs of smoke. Peter, clinging to the side of a fighter, was nearly thrown off into the endless smog. Only Diana and Aang kept their footing. Diana, by slamming her sword into the deck as an anchor, and Aang, by simply standing on a current of air. The bomber, now free, completed its run. It didn't fire a missile. It simply dove, its entire body a weapon of erasure, and slammed into the bridge of the Audacity. The explosion was silent. There was no fire, no sound. Just a sphere of absolute nothingness that expanded outwards, unrighting the bridge and a huge chunk of the forward hull from existence. Captain Rosalind! Deku screamed, scrambling back to his feet on the slanted deck. There was no reply. The mission was a catastrophic failure. The ship was dying. The hero they were sent to save was gone. A cold, hollow despair washed over Deku, heavier than the tilting airship. This is bad. This is professionally bad, Peter said, landing on the deck near Deku. New plan? The words sparked something in Deku. Desperation. This couldn't be the end. He refused it. The mission isn't over, he shouted, his voice raw. We can't save the ship, but we can still save him. Aang, can you get inside? See if he's alive. Aang nodded, his expression grim. He became a blur, gusting into the gaping, silent hole where the bridge used to be. The rest of you! Deku commanded, a new, frantic energy in his voice. We're not fighting to win anymore. We're fighting to escape. Form a perimeter around the breach. We're buying Aang time. This time, the order was clear, concise, and born of desperation. This time, they listened. Naruto, his usual grin gone, replaced by a grim scowl, created a defensive wall of clones. Diana, her jaw set, stood shoulder to shoulder with them, her shield now held with a vengeful fury. Peter used his webs to create tripwires and nets across the deck, finally having stationary objects to anchor to. They fought back to back, a desperate, hopeless last stand. It was no longer a battle of styles, it was a pure struggle for survival. A moment later, Aang shot out of the breach, his face pale. In his arms, cradled by currents of air, was the unconscious, battered form of Captain Even Roslin. He was alive, but barely. "I have him!" Aang yelled. He was thrown clear by the unexplosion. A portal, the same shimmering gateway to the archive, opened in the middle of their defensive circle. "Go! Get him through!" Deku roared, unleashing a black whip barrage to force the echoes back. Aang flew through the portal with the captain. Diana was next, her eyes never leaving the enemy until the last possible second. Naruto grabbed Peter, who was busy stringing up one last web net, and bodily threw him through before jumping in himself. Deku was the last one left. He stood on the deck of the dying sky galleon, the world of smog and iron crumbling around him. He took one last look. He saw the Viridian Spire, the proudest monument of this world, beginning to flicker. The brassy sky was dissolving at the edges, being eaten away by the same starless void from his own world. The roaring sounds of the city were fading, replaced by that all-consuming, profound silence. He had failed. With a cry of anguish, he threw himself through the portal just as the gray, silent hand of an echo reached for him. He tumbled onto the cool, crystalline floor of the archive, the portal snapping shut behind him. The sudden, reverent silence of the place was deafening after the chaos of Ethelgard. Aang had gently laid Captain Roslin on the floor. The man was stirring, his face, covered in grease and blood, was a mask of confusion. He looked around at the impossible library, at the legendary figures, and then at Deku, the boy who had tried to lead them. The team gathered, their moods dark. Diana was inspecting the gray patch on her shield, her expression unreadable. Naruto was pacing, kicking at the crystal floor with frustration. Peter was leaning against the shelf of light, his head down. Aang knelt by the captain, a sad, weary look on his face. Captain Roslin pushed himself up on one elbow, his eyes locking onto Deku. There was no gratitude in them. Only a vast, soul-shattering emptiness. "My ship," he whispered, his voice raspy. "My crew, my city, we're sorry," Deku began, taking a step forward. "We tried." "You tried?" Roslin's voice rose, cracking with grief and rage. He pointed a shaking finger at Deku. "You were too late. Your chaos, your plan, it cost us everything. We were holding them. We were making our stand. Then you appeared, a whirlwind of incompetence." Deku flinched as if struck. "I heard you," Roslin spat, his eyes wild with loss. "Shouting orders that no one followed. Hesitating. You had a choice, the bomber or my engine. You froze. A leader doesn't freeze." He looked past Deku at the others, at the god, the ninja, the avatar. "They sent children to do a man's job." Then his gaze fell back on Deku, filled with a bitterness that was colder than the void. "Some leader. You didn't save me. You just curated my failure. You brought back a souvenir from my world's funeral." With that, his strength gave out. His eyes rolled back, and he collapsed, unconscious again. But his words hung in the air, sharp and poisonous as shrapnel. The silence that followed was thick with accusation. It was Naruto who broke it. "He's right!" The Hokage exploded, his fists clenched, his face a mask of fury. He stomped over to Deku, jabbing a finger in his chest. "What was that? Run interference? That's not a plan, it's a suggestion." We were tripping over each other. A Hokage would have made a choice. A real choice, not just stuttering while a world died. You were in over your head from the second we got there. "Naruto, that's not fair," Peter started, pushing off the shelf. The kid was playing hero." Naruto cut him off, not even looking at him. His glare was fixed on Deku. "This isn't a training exercise. There are no do-overs. Diana's voice, cool and precise as glacial ice, cut through Naruto's rage. His anger is misplaced, but his assessment is not incorrect. She walked forward, her gaze clinical and unforgiving. Your strategy was fundamentally flawed, Izuku Midoriya. You assigned tasks without understanding synergy. You placed a force of chaos, Naruto, next to a bastion of order, myself, and expected harmony. You tasked a pacifist, Aang, with a role requiring aggressive pacification against an enemy that cannot be pacified. You failed to account for Spider-Man's environmental limitations. Every word was a perfectly aimed dart. You saw the battlefield as a checklist, not a living entity. She continued, her voice devoid of heat but full of crushing disappointment. When a commander's plan fails, they must adapt. You just shouted louder. The aeronaut was right. You froze. She stopped in front of him and looked down, not with malice, but with the cold finality of a judge passing sentence. Hope is not a strategy. An analysis without authority is merely observation. You did not lead us today. You just watched us fail. She turned and walked away, picking a distant, empty corridor to stare into, her back to him. The rejection was absolute. Naruto, his anger spent, just looked at Deku with pity and disgust, then stalked off in another direction, leaving him alone. Peter opened his mouth to say something, then closed it, shrugging helplessly before going to check on the still unconscious captain. Aang looked at Deku, his eyes filled with a deep, sorrowful empathy, but he said nothing. He turned his attention back to healing the aeronaut, his silence another form of judgment. Deku stood alone in the center of the infinite library. The words of Roslin, Naruto, and Diana echoed in his head, a chorus of his own failure. Too late. Whirlwind of incompetence. A leader doesn't freeze. In over your head. Hope is not a strategy. He had been given command of legends, and he had led them to ruin. A world was gone. Not just a city, not just a hero's ship, but an entire story. A whole shelf in this infinite archive, now empty, its crystal books shattered into dust because of him. The weight was unbearable. He stumbled away from the others, his feet carrying him down a random corridor of light. He walked until their presence was just a faint glow in the distance. He was surrounded by the silent, judging presence of a billion successful stories, each one a testament to a heroism he could not grasp. He sank to his knees, the smooth, crystalline floor cold against his skin. He was a fraud. An imposter. The librarian had been wrong. His potential wasn't a weapon, it was a liability. He wasn't a story being written. He was a scribble in the margins, a mistake that had just cost the universe its existence. He buried his face in his hands, and for the first time since he was a small, quirkless child being told he could never be a hero, Izuku Midoriya wept in utter, soul-crushing despair. The archive was a place of infinite stories, but for Izuku Midoriya, it had become a cathedral of his own singular failure. He had fled from the accusing stares of his teammates, the palpable disappointment that was colder and sharper than any physical blow. He had stumbled down a random corridor of light, a spiraling passage lined with crystal books telling tales of triumphant heroes, each one a silent, glittering monument to a competence he could not grasp. He finally collapsed in a secluded alcove where the light of the main nexus was a distant, hazy star, and the only sound was the faint, cosmic hum of forgotten narratives. He was alone, and the silence was an echo of the one he had just failed to defeat. The words of Captain Roslin were a brand on his soul. Whirlwind of incompetence. A leader doesn't freeze. Diana's cold, clinical assessment cut even deeper. Hope is not a strategy. And Naruto's raw, furious accusation. You were in over your head. They were right. They were all right. He was drowning. The weight of his failure was a physical thing, a crushing pressure on his chest that made each breath a ragged, shallow gasp. The librarian's words, "Your potential is the weapon, you will lead them through analysis and empathy," felt like a bitter cosmic joke. What good was analysis when it led to ruin? What good was empathy when it just meant you felt the pain of the world you let die more keenly? His hands, trembling uncontrollably, found the familiar comfort of his utility belt. He pulled out the notebook. Multiversal Hero Analysis for the Future, Volume 1. The title itself was a mockery. He flipped it open, the crisp pages a stark contrast to the mess of his emotions. His pen, clutched in a white-knuckled grip, found the next blank page. He had to solve this. It was an equation, it had to be. A problem of force vectors, power outputs, and tactical synergy. He had failed because his calculations were wrong. He just needed to find the right ones. His pen began to move, a frantic, desperate scrawl. Problem: disparate fighting styles lead to tactical interference. Naruto, chaos, versus Diana, order. Solution: spatial separation. Assign distinct battle zones. Zone A, Naruto, high-speed flank. Zone B, Diana, central defense. Variable: what if zones are breached? Enemy is fluid. Plan lacks adaptability. He crossed out the entire section with a violent scribble. The ink bled through the page. New approach: power combinations. Equation: Naruto's clones X-Aing's airbending, Spider-Man's webs / Diana's shield bash, equals crowd control squared? It was nonsensical. He was trying to apply the rigid logic of physics to the beautiful, chaotic art of heroism, and the numbers were mocking him. He drew diagrams of battle formations, arrows indicating enemy movements, charts detailing power levels and cooldown times. The pages filled with a madman's calculus, a desperate attempt to quantify the unquantifiable. His mind kept defaulting to the same paradigm, the same shining example he had spent his entire life trying to emulate. What would All Might do? He could see him now, a phantom in his memory, standing tall amidst the ruins of Kamino. His smile, even when bloodied and exhausted, was a weapon in itself. All Might didn't need complex equations. His strategy was presence. His plan was to be stronger, to be faster, to be the unwavering pillar of hope that broke the enemy's will before the first punch was even thrown. A hero! All Might's voice echoed in his head, a memory from a sun-drenched beach. Is someone who smashes through every wall life puts in their way, but I can't. Deku whispered to the silent library, his voice cracking. I'm not strong enough. He wasn't All Might. He couldn't command respect with a glance. He couldn't end a fight with his sheer presence. He had tried to give those bold, decisive commands, but his voice lacked the weight of absolute power. It was the voice of a boy wearing a costume that was too big for him. The vestiges within One for All felt his despair. It was a cold plunge, a dousing of the bright flame that was Izuku Midoriya. They stirred in the subconscious realm, their phantom forms agitated. The boy is breaking. The second user, his face a grim slash of disapproval, stated flatly. We must help him. Nana Shimura urged, her spectral form radiating concern. She reached out, as if she could touch him through the veil of consciousness. This burden is too great to bear alone, but it was the fourth user, Haikyuu Shinomori, who raised a calming hand. No. We cannot interfere. This is not a battle of strength. It is a battle of self. The librarian chose him for who he is, not for who he carries within him. If we give him the answer, he will never learn to find his own. A grim silence fell over the ghostly council. They knew Haikyuu was right. They had passed on their quirks, their power, their will. But this trial, this crisis of identity, was Izuku's alone. All they could do was watch, and wait, and hope that the ninth user, the boy who had shown them all what it truly meant to save someone, could find a way to save himself. So Deku remained alone, trapped in his spiral. He filled page after page with his frantic, useless equations. He didn't notice the passage of time, didn't feel the phantom ache of hunger or thirst that didn't exist in this place. There was only him, the notebook, and the ghost of the man he could never be, whispering impossible standards in his ear. The notebook, his greatest tool and comfort, had become his prison. In the main nexus of the archive, a somber quiet had settled over the rest of the team. Captain Roslin lay on a divan of pure light conjured by the archive's will, sleeping fitfully, his dreams haunted by smog and silence. Naruto had tried to burn off his frustration by sparring against an unmoving crystal shelf, his punches and Raisengans doing absolutely nothing. He now sat cross-legged, brooding, his usual boundless energy turned inward into a knot of anger and guilt. He was a leader himself, a Kage. He knew the weight of command, and he knew the sting of failure. His outburst at Deku had been born of that shared pain, but now, in the quiet, it felt harsh and unproductive. Diana stood before the gray, corrupted patch on her shield. It was a scar of nullity, a dead spot on a divine weapon. She traced its edge with a single finger. This shield was a gift from Zeus, forged in the fires of Hephaestus, a thing of myth and magic. And this nothingness had wounded it. Her words to Izuku had been the truth, a tactical debriefing from a general to a subordinate. She did not regret them, truth was paramount, but she recognized the profound despair they had caused. She had seen that look in the eyes of young soldiers before, the ones who break after their first taste of true, irreversible loss. Peter Parker was tinkering. He sat on the floor, the web shooters from his wrists disassembled into a dozen tiny, intricate pieces he was polishing with the scrap of his own suit. It was a nervous habit, something to keep his hands and his mind busy when the alternative was thinking too hard. He kept glancing down the corridor where Deku had disappeared. He'd seen that spiral before, he'd lived it. After Gwen. After Uncle Ben. The desperate need to find a scientific or logical reason for a tragedy that was simply, horribly, a tragedy. He wanted to go to the kid, tell him it wasn't his fault, tell him that sometimes, you just can't save everyone. But he also knew that those were just words, and right now, words were probably the last thing the kid wanted to hear from someone he saw as a legend. Aang was the only one who seemed at peace, though his serenity was tinged with a deep, pervasive sadness. He had been tending to Captain Roslin, using a gentle form of energy healing learned from the lion turtle to soothe the man's troubled spirit. Now, he sat in a meditative pose a short distance away, his eyes closed. But he was not looking inward. He was looking out. With his spiritual senses, a skill honed by a lifetime of communing with the spirit world, he could feel the emotional state of the archive. He felt Naruto's fiery frustration, Diana's cool, sharp regret, and Peter's buzzing, anxious sympathy. But all of it was dwarfed by the storm that was Izuku Midoriya. From where Aang sat, Deku's spirit was a brilliant, green-white sun, a nexus of astonishing power and potential. But right now, that sun was in eclipse. A storm cloud of self-doubt and despair, black and heavy, was swirling around it, threatening to extinguish its light. And hovering above it all, Aang could see a phantom shape, a larger-than-life figure with two distinct antennae-like tufts of hair, its presence both an inspiration and a crushing weight upon the boy's spirit. It was the ghost of a predecessor, an ideal so powerful it was preventing the successor from seeing himself. Aang knew that ghost. He had one of his own. He remembered, with a clarity that decades had not dimmed, the feeling of staring at his own reflection in the spirit world and seeing the stern, bearded face of Avatar Roku stare back. He remembered the weight of Roku's words, the demand for decisive, absolute action against the Fire Lord. You must be decisive. The ghost of his past life had commanded. Aang had tried. He had tried to be that ruthless, decisive Avatar. He had buried a squadron of Fire Nation soldiers in an avalanche. He had sunk their ships. He had fought with a fury that was not his own, and every time, it had felt like wearing clothes that didn't fit, a betrayal of his own deepest self, the teachings of the monks who had raised him. It had felt wrong. He opened his eyes, his gentle gray gaze falling upon the distant, huddled figure of Izuku. He saw not a failed leader. He saw a kindred spirit, a young boy handed a power that could shape the world, and burdened by a legacy he felt he could never live up to. He rose to his feet, his movements silent. Peter looked up from his web shooters. Going to check on him? Aang nodded. I may have a story he needs to hear. He walked down the long, spiraling corridor, the light of the crystal books glinting off his bald head. He found Deku in the alcove, a mess of frantic energy and despair. The boy was hunched over his notebook, muttering to himself, his pen scratching furiously against the paper. He didn't even notice Aang's approach until the Avatar was standing right beside him. Those look like complicated plans, Aang said, his voice soft and gentle, a stark contrast to the storm in Deku's mind. Deku flinched violently, snapping his notebook shut as if caught doing something shameful. He scrambled backwards, his face a mess of tear tracks, exhaustion, and raw shame. He couldn't meet Aang's eyes. I am busy, he stammered, his voice hoarse. I have to figure this out. I have to find the solution. Aang didn't press. He simply sat down on the crystalline floor, cross-legged, a few feet away. He didn't look at Deku, but instead gazed up at the swirling cosmos that served as the archive ceiling. When I was a boy, Aang began, his voice calm and conversational. A little younger than you are now, I ran away from home. The other monks, my teachers, my family, they told me I was the Avatar. They said I had a destiny to save the world. It was too much. The weight of it. I think you know what that weight feels like. Deku risked a glance at him. Aang was still looking up, a faint, sad smile on his face. I got caught in a storm and I ended up frozen in an iceberg for 100 years. Aang continued, his tone matter-of-fact. When I woke up, everyone I had ever known was gone. My people, the air nomads, had been wiped out. And the world was in the middle of a war that I was supposed to have prevented. He paused, letting the weight of that sink in. My first mission wasn't a failure. It was a failure that had already happened a century ago. My very existence began with the greatest failure an Avatar could have. Deku stared at him, his frantic energy momentarily forgotten. He knew the stories, of course. He had watched the show, but hearing it from the man himself, seeing the ancient pain that still lived in his serene eyes, it was different. It was real. I wanted to fix it, Aang said, finally turning to look at Deku. His gray eyes were full of a compassion so deep it was almost overwhelming. I thought I had to be what everyone expected. I had to be this powerful, serious, larger-than-life figure. I had to be Avatar Roku. He gestured vaguely, as if at a ghost only he could see. He was my past life. He was powerful, and wise, and so decisive. He would appear to me and tell me what I needed to do. He told me I had to be strong, that I had to be willing to end the Fire Lord to bring balance. He was my all might. The name landed in the space between them, and Deku flinched again. Aang had seen it. He had seen the ghost. I tried, Aang said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. I really did. I tried to be Roku. I tried to be as ruthless as he said I needed to be. In the North Pole, I let the ocean spirit merge with me, and we destroyed an entire fleet. We washed soldiers away. I won the battle, but I lost a piece of myself. It wasn't me. It was just rage and power. It wasn't balance. It was just another kind of destruction. Deku's hands, which had been gripping his notebook so tightly his knuckles were white, slowly began to relax. He was listening, really listening, for the first time since they had returned from Ethelgard. It all came to a head on the day I had to face Fire Lord Ozai, Aang said, his gaze becoming distant again, lost in a memory of fire and rock. All of my past lives, including Roku, told me the same thing. You must take his life. It is the only way to end the war. And I couldn't. It was against everything the monks had ever taught me. It was against who I was. I was terrified, Aang confessed, his voice barely audible. I felt like a coward. A failure. I was about to face the most powerful man in the world, and my own past, my own all might, was telling me that my very nature was a weakness that would doom everyone. I thought I had to choose, be a successful Avatar, or be Aang. He looked back at Deku, a profound wisdom in his young old eyes. But I was wrong. That was a false choice. I found another way. A third option. I took away his bending. I defeated him without compromising who I was. I didn't succeed by becoming Avatar Roku. Aang leaned forward slightly, his gaze gentle but intense. He spoke the words that would change everything for Izuku Midoriya. I could only succeed when I finally became Avatar Aang. And the world didn't need another Roku. It needed me. He paused, letting the silence stretch, giving the words time to land. Diana, Naruto, Peter, they are all legends. They are used to being led by other legends. By kings and generals and gods. They are used to being led by their world's version of Roku, or All Might. Aang gestured to the closed notebook in Deku's lap. You have been trying to write All Might's battle plans. But they don't need you to be All Might. He smiled, a warm, genuine smile that seemed to push back the shadows in the alcove. They need you to be Deku. The words struck Izuku with the force of a 100% smash, but instead of breaking bones, they shattered the prison of doubt he had built around his heart. They need you to be Deku. What did that mean? Who was Deku? He wasn't a symbol. He wasn't a god of war or a ninja king. He was a fanboy, a nerd, an analyst. He was the kid who muttered to himself, who filled notebooks with obsessive detail about everyone else's powers because he had none of his own for so long. He was the one who saw the person behind the quirk, the heart behind the hero. He had been trying to lead with a borrowed strength, a borrowed authority. He had been trying to command them. But the librarian's words came flooding back. You will not lead them through authority. You will lead them through analysis and empathy. Your strength is not in commanding, but in understanding. He looked down at his notebook, the one filled with failed equations and tactical diagrams. This was him trying to be All Might. This was him trying to be Roku. It was an imitation. His eyes flickered to Aang. He hadn't come over to give him a rousing speech or a pat on the back. He had shared his own pain, his own failure. He had connected with him not as an avatar to a student, but as a person to a person. He had used empathy. And it had worked where all of Deku's own frantic logic had failed. A slow, profound realization dawned in Deku's exhausted mind. His greatest strength wasn't just analyzing powers. It was analyzing people. He had been so focused on what his team could do that he had completely ignored who they were. He had told Naruto to run interference, a task for a soldier, when Naruto was a force of nature fueled by the desire to protect his precious people. He had told Diana to hold a line, a static role for a dynamic warrior whose sense of justice demanded she be where the fighting was thickest. He had given them all orders that contradicted their very nature. He had failed because he hadn't been Deku enough. Deku started, his voice thick with unshed tears, but these were not tears of despair. They were tears of catharsis, of a terrible pressure finally being released. I understand. He took a deep, shuddering breath, the first full breath he'd taken in hours. The crushing weight on his chest lessened, replaced by a fragile, tentative flicker of something new. Not the bold, brassy confidence of All Might, but a quiet, focused resolve. He looked at Aang, a real, genuine flicker of gratitude in his eyes. Thank you, Aang. Aang simply smiled and bowed his head. We are a team. We lift each other up when we fall. With that, he rose and walked silently back toward the main nexus, leaving Deku alone once more. But this time, the solitude was not a prison. It was a sanctuary. Deku sat there for a long moment, the quiet of the archive settling around him. He looked down at the notebook in his lap, its pages a testament to his failed approach. With a sense of ceremony, he closed it. He would not be writing in that book again. He reached into his utility belt and pulled out another one. It was fresh, clean, its cover a blank slate. Its pages held no ghosts, no impossible standards. They held only potential. His potential. He uncapped his pen. He flipped to the first page. The frantic, desperate energy was gone. His hand was steady. His mind was clear. He was not writing battle plans. He was not creating equations. He was doing what Deku did best. He was analyzing heroes. But this time, he was analyzing their hearts. His pen began to move, the scratching sound purposeful and quiet in the vast library. Hero Analysis for True Synergy Volume 1. Subject Naruto Uzumaki. Power source, not just chakra. It's his bonds. His desire to be acknowledged and protect his friends is the fuel for his fire. His never-give-up attitude is his strongest jutsu. Psychological profile. Appears simple, acts impulsively. This is a facade. He's an unconventional genius who thrives in chaos he creates. He's not a soldier to be ordered. He's a natural disaster to be aimed. Moral code, absolute loyalty. Will sacrifice the mission for a comrade without hesitation. This isn't a weakness, it's his core principle. Synergy strategy. Do not give him a zone. Give him a person to protect. Task him with being Diana's living shield, or keeping enemies off Aang. His unrestrained style becomes a focused defense when anchored to a comrade. His chaos needs a calm center to revolve around. He turned the page. Subject Diana Prince, Wonder Woman. Power source. Divine birthright, yes, but also a profound, millennia-old love for humanity, and an unshakable belief in truth. She fights for an ideal. Psychological profile, a warrior general, but also a diplomat and a princess. Responds to logic and moral imperatives, not blind authority. Her skepticism of my leadership was earned. She needs to see the wisdom in a plan, not just be told to execute it. Moral code, will not compromise on her principles. Believes in facing threats head-on. Prefers direct, honorable combat. Deception or retreat is a last resort. Synergy strategy, don't use her as a static wall. She is the tip of the spear. The plan should revolve around creating a single, decisive moment for her to shatter the enemy's core. Use the others to clear her path. Her purpose is not to hold the line, but to break it. He kept writing, the words flowing freely now. He wrote about Peter, about how his humor wasn't just a personality quirk but a tool to manage fear and disarm opponents, and how his true strength was his unbreakable sense of responsibility, the promise to a ghost of his own. He wrote about Aang, understanding now that his pacifism wasn't a limitation, but a challenge to find a better, more creative solution that the enemy would never anticipate. He wasn't trying to be their leader anymore. He was trying to be their teammate. He filled page after page, his analysis deeper and more insightful than ever before. The scribbling sound, once a frantic symptom of his panic, was now the steady, rhythmic pulse of his own quiet confidence. He was no longer trying to solve a problem. He was getting to know his friends, and in a quiet corner of the infinite archive, surrounded by the stories of a billion heroes, Izuku, Deku, Midoriya finally started writing his own. The first sign of change was the silence. For hours, the only sound from Deku's self-imposed exile had been the frantic, neurotic scratching of his pen, a noise that had set everyone's teeth on edge. It was the sound of panic, of a mind furiously spinning its wheels in a rut of despair. Then, it had stopped. It was replaced by a different kind of scribbling, a calmer, more rhythmic and purposeful sound. Now, that too had faded. In the main nexus of the archive, the atmosphere was thick with a tense, unspoken truce. Captain Roslin still slept, his breathing now deep and even under Aang's spiritual care. Diana stood like a statue, her back to the group, a silent vigil of disapproval. Naruto sat slumped against a crystalline shelf, arms crossed, his fiery anger having cooled into a sullen, brooding silence. Peter had finally reassembled his web shooters and was now idly creating a complex cat's cradle of shimmering web fluid between his fingers, his own form of anxious meditation. It was Aang who looked up first, his head tilted. He felt the shift in Deku's spirit. The storm had passed. The frantic, churning energy had settled into a clear, calm pool. A moment later, Deku emerged from the corridor. The change in him was subtle, yet profound. His shoulders, which had been hunched in a permanent cringe of apology, were now squared. His gaze, previously darting and fearful, was now steady and direct. He wasn't radiating the booming confidence of all might. This was something quieter, something more intrinsic. It was the calm assurance of a craftsman who has finally understood the nature of his tools. He held a new notebook in his hand, not as a shield, but as a charter. He walked into the center of the nexus and stopped. He didn't apologize. He didn't make excuses. He simply waited, his quiet presence demanding their attention more effectively than any shouted command ever could. One by one, they turned to look at him. Peter's web fiddling ceased. Naruto's sullen glare softened into curiosity. Diana, after a long moment, finally turned from her vigil, her arms crossed, her expression one of stern neutrality. Deku met their gazes, each in turn. "I was wrong," he said, his voice clear and even. It didn't hold the tremor of fear or the false bravado from before. It was just a statement of fact. "I tried to be a leader you didn't need, and I gave you a plan that didn't respect who you are. I treated you like pieces on a board. I failed. And a world paid the price for my mistake. I can't undo that, but I can learn from it." He opened the new notebook. "The librarian told me to lead with empathy and analysis. I only focused on the analysis of power. I forgot the empathy. I forgot to analyze the most important part of any hero, their heart." He looked directly at Naruto. "I'm not going to give orders anymore," he said. "I'm going to ask for help. And I need to start by understanding." His gaze was so earnest, so devoid of ego, that Naruto found his own anger deflating completely, replaced by a grudging respect. This wasn't the same terrified kid from before. Naruto, Deku said, taking a step toward him. I need you to teach me. I need to understand your way of fighting. Not just the jutsu, but the philosophy behind it. I need you to spar with me. Naruto blinked, taken aback. He had expected more apologies, more frantic plans. He had not expected a challenge. A genuine, almost academic curiosity radiated from the green-haired kid. A slow grin, the first one in hours, spread across his face. Ha! You want to spar with me? He said, hopping to his feet and stretching theatrically. You sure about that? I'm the 7th Hokage. I don't go easy on anyone. I'm not asking you to. Deku replied, his expression serious. I need to see you at your best. Aang smiled softly. The first thread was being woven. The sparring match took place in a vast, empty chamber that the archive seemed to conjure for them, a blank white space that stretched to an infinite horizon. Ready, believe it! Naruto shouted, already a blur of motion. He didn't start with a single punch. He started with 100. Shadow Clone Jutsu! The empty chamber was instantly filled with a sea of orange jumpsuits and confident grins. Deku found himself at the center of a whirlwind, 100 Narutos all charging him at once. His first instinct, the All Might instinct, was to meet force with force. A 15% Detroit smash would clear the area, scatter them like bowling pins. But that wasn't the point of this exercise. He wasn't here to win. He was here to learn. He activated full cowling, green lightning crackling around him, and focused. He didn't punch. He dodged. He weaved through the first wave, his mind a whirlwind of analysis. They aren't attacking randomly. There's a pattern. A pincer movement. Some are feinting, drawing my attention, while others are striking from my blind spots. It looks like chaos, but it's coordinated chaos. A Naruto clone appeared in front of him, a swirling Rasengan in its hand. Deku dropped, sliding under the attack, and used the momentum to kick the legs out from under another clone. He pushed off the floor, using a flicker of FA gene, and vaulted over a third. Not bad, Deku! The chorus of Narutos shouted. But you can't dodge forever! They were right. He was being herded. They were systematically shrinking his space, their movements a complex, fluid net that was slowly tightening around him. This wasn't a mob. This was a single, 100-bodied organism. He remembered his notes. Thrives in chaos he creates. Naruto wasn't just causing chaos. He was the conductor of it. He was a master of misdirection on a grand scale. The idiot routine, the loud proclamations, it was all part of the jutsu, a psychological feint to make you underestimate the tactical genius at work. Deku needed to break the rhythm. He couldn't outdodge 100 opponents. But maybe he could disrupt the conductor. He spotted the real Naruto standing at the edge of the clone army, his arms crossed, a focused glint in his eye. He was the source, the central processing unit for this entire beautiful mess. Deku stopped dodging. He planted his feet. A dozen clones converged on him. Just before they struck, he fired a single, thin strand of black whip. It wasn't aimed at any of the clones. It shot past them, a black thread in the white void, and wrapped around the real Naruto's ankle. Naruto's eyes widened in surprise. Deku yanked hard. The real Naruto was pulled off his feet, his concentration broken for a split second. In that instant, every single shadow clone wavered, their movements becoming clumsy and uncoordinated. The hive mind had been momentarily disconnected. It was the opening Deku needed. He didn't attack. He pushed off the ground, a 20% smash aimed at the floor, launching himself high into the air. He landed beside the now upright but still surprised Naruto. The clones dissipated in puffs of smoke. The chamber was silent. Naruto stared at him, a look of genuine shock on his face. Then, he burst into laughter. A loud, booming, unrestrained laugh that echoed in the empty space. Ha ha! You got me! He roared, slapping Deku on the back so hard the boy stumbled. You didn't go for the clones, you went for the original. You figured it out. You're not just a bookworm, you're a sneaky bookworm. I like it, Deku grinned, a real, relieved grin. I understand now, he said, catching his breath. Your clones aren't just an army. They're a sensory net. You feel what they feel, you see what they see. You fight like you're playing 100 games of chess at once. Exactly! Naruto beamed. And my real strength, he added, his voice dropping slightly, becoming more serious, is that I'd let every single one of those clones get destroyed if it meant protecting someone important. That's the real trick. You give the enemy 1,000,000 targets, but only one of them actually matters. Deku's eyes widened as the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Give him a person to protect. That was it. That was the key. He grabbed his notebook, which he'd set aside, and furiously scribbled a new note. Naruto's clones are not the weapon. They are the shield for the true objective. He looked up at Naruto, a new level of respect in his eyes. Thank you, Hokage-sama. Naruto waved a hand dismissively, though he puffed his chest out a bit at the formal title. Just Naruto is fine. And hey, that black whip stuff is pretty cool. We should try combining it with a Rasen shuriken sometime. The second thread was woven. Tighter this time. Deku's next stop was Diana. He found her in a chamber simulating the night sky, where she was practicing her forms, her god-killer sword a silver whisper in the starlight. She moved with a grace and precision that was both beautiful and terrifying. Each swing, each parry, held the weight of millennia. She stopped as he approached, her expression still cool, but the hard edge of her disapproval had softened. She had watched the spar with Naruto. Princess Diana, Deku began, bowing his head slightly, a gesture of sincere respect. I apologize for my tactical error. I gave you the role of a sentry, when you are a champion. Diana raised an eyebrow. Go on, I need to understand your strategy, Deku said, notebook in hand. Not just how you fight, but why you fight the way you do. You are a general. I need a lesson in the art of war. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched Diana's lips. This was a language she understood. She was not being asked to follow a foolish boy. She was being consulted by a student of strategy, an apprentice commander. The art of war is not about overwhelming force, Izuku Midoriya, she began, her voice taking on the tone of a master instructing a pupil. It is about applying the right force at the right moment. A battle is a story. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. The key is to control the narrative. She gestured for him to stand opposite her. She didn't offer him a weapon. Show me your defensive stance. Deku adopted the basic defensive posture he'd learned at UA. It was solid, practical, designed to mitigate damage. Diana shook her head. That is the stance of a brawler. It is a stance that says, hit me, I can take it. An Amazon stance says, hit me, and you will regret it. She corrected his footing, shifted his balance. Your power is immense, but you hold it back, bleeding it out in percentages. You fear it. An Amazon does not fear her strength. She hones it into a perfect, killing edge. Not an edge of malice, but of justice. A force so absolute it ends the conflict swiftly, she demonstrated. She moved through a series of attacks, and her shield was not just a defensive tool. It was a weapon. She used it to parry, but the parry flowed into a bash that would break bones. She used it to block, but the block was a platform to launch a kick. Her sword and shield were not two separate items. They were two parts of a single, fluid concept of battle. Your black whip, she said, her eyes glinting with tactical insight. You use it to restrain, to pull. You think like a constable. Think like a warrior. It can be a snare, yes. But it can also be a feint, a distraction. Force the enemy to look at your left hand, while your right hand delivers the true blow. Deku absorbed it all, his mind racing, his pen flying across the page. He was learning the ancient, brutal ballet of Amazonian warfare. It was about decisive action, about identifying the enemy's linchpin, their commander, their power source, their morale, and shattering it with one perfect, overwhelming strike. Ethelgard, Diana said, her voice dropping, was lost because we fought a battle of attrition. We swatted at the flies instead of killing the beast that was spawning them. A true commander would have identified the source of the echoes and struck it directly. Deku's blood ran cold. She was right. He had been so focused on the symptoms, the fighters, the ship's engine, that he never even considered the disease. How? He asked, his voice a whisper. How would you have found it? You look for the heart, she said simply. Every army has one. You observe the flow of battle. Where do the reinforcements come from? Where do their eyes turn for orders? What is the one target they protect above all others? You find that, and you commit everything to its destruction. It is a gamble, but decisive victory is always a gamble. That is the burden of command. Deku stared at her, a profound understanding dawning. He had treated her like a shield when he should have been using her as a scalpel. He had asked her to hold the line, when he should have asked her to lead the charge. Your heart is in the right place, Izuku Midoriya, Diana concluded, her voice softer now, the lesson over. You wish to save everyone. It is a noble sentiment, but the role of a general is often to make the choice of who must be sacrificed so that more may be saved. It is a terrible calculus. Do not seek it lightly. He bowed again, deeper this time. Thank you, General, the third thread. Forged in the cold, hard logic of war, and tempered with mutual respect, he found Peter in a simulated New York City, a place of impossible skyscrapers and bustling, noisy streets conjured by the archive's power. Spider-Man was perched atop the Chrysler Building, looking out over the city that was and wasn't his home. Quite a view, huh? Peter said as Deku landed silently beside him. Smells better than the real thing. Less hot dogs and existential dread, Deku smiled. I needed to talk to you. About your webs. My webs? Peter tilted his head. Secret formula, kid. Patented. Can't have every yahoo swinging around the city. The traffic is bad enough, not the formula, Deku said, pulling out his notebook. The application. In Ethelgard, you were limited. No anchor points. My plan failed to account for your environment. Peter's light-hearted demeanor softened. He appreciated that. The kid was admitting his mistake, not just apologizing for it. Yeah, open sky combat isn't really my jam, he admitted. I'm more of a concrete canyon kind of guy. Give me an alleyway and I'm a genius. Give me a cloudy day and I'm just a guy in spandex falling with style. So I was thinking, Deku said, his muttering habit kicking in as he started sketching in his notebook. What if we make the anchor points? Your webs are incredibly strong, right? And fast-acting. Naruto's clones can move at high speeds. What if a clone, or Aang, could carry a web line across a battlefield and anchor it to something, creating a temporary web for you to swing from? Or what if Diana could throw a web cartridge like a javelin to create a distant anchor point? We could build your web for you. Peter went silent. His mask's lenses widened. He stared at the frantic sketches Deku was making, diagrams of clones creating a crisscrossing web matrix in midair, of Aang using air currents to guide web lines into place. Kid, Peter said slowly, a note of genuine awe in his voice. That's brilliant. You're talking about turning me into an aerial superiority fighter, building a temporary, three-dimensional web in the middle of a battle. The level of coordination required would be insane. But it's possible, right? Deku asked, looking up, his eyes bright with excitement. Possible? Yeah. It's possible, Peter said, a slow grin spreading under his mask. He looked at Deku with a new understanding. This kid's brain didn't just analyze, it innovated. It connected dots no one else saw. You're not just a fanboy, are you? You're an engineer. I just like seeing how things work. Deku mumbled, a blush creeping up his neck. There's more, Peter said, getting into it now, his own brilliant, scientific mind firing up. My webs can do more than just swing. Impact webbing for non-lethal takedowns. Trip mines. I even have an electric web formula that could probably stun those echo things. But I need time to set them up. I need a safe perimeter. Diana can create that perimeter, Deku said instantly. And Naruto's clones can act as decoys, drawing the enemy into your traps. They spent the next hour talking, a rapid-fire exchange of ideas. Deku learned about Peter's spider sense, the danger warning system that made him so hard to hit. He learned about his unwavering moral code, the absolute refusal to take a life, a rule born from the searing pain of his greatest failure. He learned about the promise to Uncle Ben, the ghost that didn't crush Peter, but instead lifted him up, the bedrock of his entire heroic identity. Responsibility, Peter said, his voice quiet as he stared out at the city. That's the whole gig. You get the power, you get the responsibility. All of it. The wins, the losses, the people you save, and the ones you can't. You can't let the losses break you. You get up, you put the mask back on, and you try to do better tomorrow. He looked at Deku, his mask's lenses reflecting the city lights. You get that, kid? I can see it. You've got the weight of the world on your shoulders. Just make sure you bend your knees, or it'll crush you. Deku nodded, absorbing the simple, profound wisdom. He wasn't just learning about a hero. He was learning about a man. A good man trying his best, the fourth thread. Woven from innovation, respect, and the shared burden of responsibility. The last person he sought out was Aang. He found him not in a simulation, but back in the main nexus of the archive, meditating before a crystal book that showed a peaceful, sun-drenched valley where sky bison lazily floated. Deku sat down quietly, a respectful distance away, and waited. He didn't need to ask Aang about his powers. He understood airbending, he understood the avatar state. What he needed to understand was the soul behind it. After a few minutes, Aang opened his eyes and smiled. You have been busy, Izuku. I've been listening, Deku corrected gently. Aang, in Ethelgard I gave you the worst possible job. I asked you to fight an enemy that couldn't be reasoned with, using methods that were designed to de-escalate. It was a contradiction, and I put you in the middle of it. The river cannot flow through solid rock, Aang replied calmly. It must flow around it. I was trying to stop the rock. That was my mistake as much as yours, but that's your philosophy, isn't it? Deku asked, genuinely curious. To find the path of least resistance. To use your opponent's energy against them. But what do you do when your opponent has no energy? The null is a void. Silence. Emptiness. It's like trying to redirect. Nothing. Aang grew pensive, his gaze turning to the peaceful scene in the crystal. That is a question I have been meditating on since we arrived. My entire life has been about seeking balance, but the null does not want balance. It wants to erase the scales entirely. How do you balance something against nothing? They sat in silence for a long moment, contemplating the impossible philosophical problem. Maybe, Deku said slowly, thinking aloud, maybe the answer isn't to redirect the nothing. Maybe it's to fill it. Aang's eyes widened slightly. The null is silence. Deku continued, the idea taking shape in his mind. So we fight it with sound. It's emptiness, so we fight it with substance. It's despair, so we fight it with hope. Your pacifism, it's not a weakness against them. It's a challenge to find a weapon they can't comprehend. You don't have to hurt them. You have to overwhelm them with life. He looked at Aang, his eyes shining. What if your role isn't crowd control? What if your role is to be the heart of our spiritual defense? While we fight their bodies, you fight their concept. You project peace, life, balance, not to defeat them, but to remind them of what they are trying to erase. You are the anti-null. Aang stared at Deku, a look of profound revelation on his face. He had been trying to apply old solutions to a new problem. He had been trying to bend an element that didn't exist. Deku, with his empathetic analysis, had just handed him a new form of bending. Bending the very concept of the battle, to overwhelm them with life. Aang whispered, the words resonating deep within his spirit. He looked at Deku, and for the first time, he saw not just a successor, not just a boy with potential, but a true spiritual peer. A soul who understood the deepest fundamentals of the cosmic struggle they were in. You see beyond the physical fight, Izuku, Aang said, his voice filled with a quiet awe. That is a wisdom that takes most lifetimes to learn, the final thread. The strongest of them all. Woven not from power or strategy, but from a shared, fundamental understanding of the nature of their war. Deku returned to the center of the nexus. The atmosphere had completely transformed. Naruto was excitedly explaining the concept of a tailed beast bomb to a fascinated Peter, who was frantically sketching designs for a containment device. Diana was no longer standing apart, but was watching them, a small, amused smile on her face. Aang radiated a newfound sense of peaceful purpose. They all turned as Deku approached. He opened his notebook, its pages now filled not with desperate equations, but with a blueprint for a team. "I have a new plan," he said, and this time, his voice held the quiet confidence of a man who knew his business. "It's not an order. It's a theory. A symphony. And it only works if we all play our part." He laid it out for them. Not a rigid set of commands, but a fluid, adaptive strategy built on enabling each other's strengths. "We don't fight in zones," he explained. "We fight in pairs and trios, constantly shifting. Naruto, you are no longer just interference. You are Peter's mobility. You are Diana's shield. Your clones create the battlefield that Peter needs, and they absorb the blows that Diana cannot afford to take while she lines up her decisive strike." He turned to Peter. "You are not just takedowns. You are the controller. You lay the traps, you create the choke points, you dictate the enemy's movement. You and Naruto together are a spider and 100 hands building his web." He looked at Diana. "You are not a wall. You are the executioner. Peter and Naruto create the opening. Aang protects you from spiritual or conceptual attacks, but when the moment comes, you are the one who strikes the heart. Your target is singular. The rest of us exist only to get you to it." Finally, he looked at Aang. "And you, Aang, are our soul. You are not on crowd control. You are on conceptual defense. You will be the calm at the center of our storm, a bubble of life and peace that the null's despair cannot penetrate. You will keep our minds clear and our hope strong." He paused, looking at each of them. "And me? I'm the nervous system. I'm the analyst in the field. I'll use my mobility to move between you all, relaying information, spotting weaknesses, and using one for all as the final, blunt instrument when we need it. I'm not the leader. I'm the support." He finished, his heart pounding, and waited for their judgment. It was Naruto who spoke first. He walked up to Deku, a massive, brilliant grin on his face. He didn't say anything. He just held out his fist. Deku stared at it for a second, then a slow smile spread across his own face. He bumped Naruto's fist with his own. "It is a strategy of profound synergy," Diana said, a nod of clear, unequivocal approval. "It is unorthodox. But it is wise. I get to have 100 ninjas build a giant web for me in the sky." Peter chirped, practically vibrating with excitement. "Kid, you are officially the best boss I have ever had, and I've worked for a guy who turned into a giant lizard." He was not big on creative input. Aang simply bowed, his eyes shining with respect. "I will be honored to be our hope, Izuku." The team was no longer a collection of disparate legends. It was a single weapon, forged from 5 unique metals, finally fused into a whole. In the heart of the infinite library, surrounded by the stories of heroes past, a new one had just been written. And as Deku closed his notebook, he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that they were finally ready for their next chapter.